Hello. Hi, welcome to the Arnold Center's annual symposium. We're really glad you're all here. I have a terrific group of journalists for you to listen to today and question them and hold them to the fire. They're good at it. They don't mind it. So I'm the director. I'm Kathleen Johnston, and we're only 4 years old. So for those of you that are students in the audience, come join us. You know, we're having a lot of fun there, and we're doing a lot of good stories. I'd like to first thank our sponsors for this event: Scripps Howard Foundation, Lumina Foundation, the Indiana Citizen, SBJ in Indianapolis, Gray Television, Indiana Local News Initiative, Hutton Honors College, Indiana Broadcasters Association, and the Hoosier State Press Association Foundation. And we have a host of local organizations throughout Indiana that are supporting us too. You can see them all on the back page. And of course, we want to thank Michael Arnolt, who's here as well, for his founding endowment so that we could start this center. We're training the next generation of investigative journalists at the center. We're a working newsroom with more than 40 students this semester, and they're working on state and national stories with professional media partners like Gray TV, Indiana Citizen, and Indiana Environmental Reporter. You know, I hope you'll take some time and go to our website, arnoldcenter.org, and check out the stories. Their story with USA Today on police and tasers is often cited as the definitive story on that subject matter, and I think it's a terrific read, and it's on our website. Just a couple weeks ago, we published and broadcast a story on underage gambling, which might affect some of you. And one of our students, Mitch here, brought the story idea to Gray TV. They loved it, and it was such a terrific effort that they ran it during Super Bowl week. So they got maximum exposure on their 114 stations in their respective websites. So we're doing amazing stories, and we'd like more of you to join us. And did I say we pay our students? It's a working newsroom, so we do pay. I'm looking out in the audience, and we have some of our graduates. Alex is here. Alex worked in the center, and he's back with us today, but Alex is now on air in Fort Wayne. And I could cite some others as well. So the people in this business are taking notice of the center, and they are hiring our folks, you know. Nick Napier, who's here, he's one of our student board members. Nick and one of our other students, Nadia, they did a story on Big Ten, on the Big Ten and how much losing coaches are being paid. And this is at your expense as college students. That story was picked up all around the country, particularly in Big Ten country, and it even landed on the front page of the Indianapolis Star. So we're doing good work, and we'd love anybody who wants to join us to come on over. It's a lot of fun, and you can talk to some of our students that are here. They're happy to talk to you. You don't have to be a journalism major to join us. We have students from SPIA and Psych, and we even had a grad student in the music school last year who wanted to join us. And what we can teach you is going to be relevant to any work you do after IU, so think of that too. All the journalists here today, they all volunteered to come here. We have some horror stories on travel. Hello, our keynote speaker, who got stuck in the snowstorms. But they all believe in the power of investigative journalism, in bettering the communities they serve. And to a person, they believe journalism, especially investigative journalism, is the lifeblood of our democracy. And our work can be exhilarating and adrenaline rushing and every other word you can think of. That spells excitement. It's a fun profession. It's never the same. It's hard work, and it's not always easy. And no job in journalism is easy. And if you think it can be dangerous, and every one of our speakers and some of our board members can tell you about close calls they've come to in the field, whether it's someone yelling at them or harassing them in their homes, or or cutting in on their live shots. It's not always easy. And I know each of them has a story of being threatened. And sadly, sometimes there's violence. And so it's a sad day today in our profession. I hope you all remember Dylan Lyons today. Take a minute and remember Dylan Lyons. He was a young 24-year-old reporter who was shot dead yesterday, along with his photographer who's fighting for his life right now. All they were doing was covering a domestic, what appears to be a domestic shooting. And there were 2 other people that lost their lives as well, and there's another woman in a hospital fighting. So please take a moment and think of Dylan, because our work does have consequences sometimes. And he's not much older than most of you here today. And you know, while the work can be exhilarating, it does have some cost. So I'm going to turn this over to my good friend and colleague, Mike Wells. We have a terrific day for you. Mike's going to start out with our sports panel, and he's going to introduce all these fine folks up here. We're going to then take a quick break, 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have a news panel on investigative journalism as well, talking about some of the new emerging models of journalism. Not everything's on TV anymore in newspapers. And then we'll take another break, and our keynote today is Paula Levine, and if you've read any of her stories, you know what a terrific journalist she is. So, and following Paula's keynote, we want you to meet the journalist. So we'll be having, out here in the Commons, we'll be having a mixer, so for about an hour, so you can meet them as well. So I hope you enjoy the day. I think you're going to like what these people have to say. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Kathleen. First off, I got to say, it is great to see so many of the students in my class who showed up today. Thank you very much for appearing today, but I really want everybody to take advantage of this opportunity to hear from some of the best investigative reporters there are in the business. And as my students know, please ask questions, because you will not have a better opportunity to pick the brains than some who have been in some of the best trenches, or toughest trenches in the business. So take advantage of this opportunity, because it'll help you going forward in your careers. The first person to my left is Steve Berkowitz. He is with USA Today, a former colleague of mine when I was at the Indianapolis Star, part of the Gannett program. Steve spends a lot of time covering college athletics. The person to the left of him is TJ Quinn. TJ Quinn is a former Major League Baseball writer who turned investigative reporter. He has a great story on why he made the switch from being a beat writer to becoming an investigative reporter. It's very similar to mine when it comes to family life. I have my wife and 2 kids here in attendance tonight, decided to show up and come up and show support today. And then we have Jill, I mess up your last name every time, Jill, Reipenhoff? Oh, Reipenhoff. She spent a lot of time covering college sports with the Columbus Dispatch, covered Jim Tressel, the Ohio State former coach. Now she works as part of the Gray Television national team on the investigative sides, covering high schools, colleges, youth sports. So I will get the discussion going by the biggest question mark a lot of college students ask me is, what has changed in the era of social media when it comes to covering investigative things?
I think this falls out of the area of where I generally do a lot of my work, but I think it's just it gives you sort of another tool and another way to find out what's going on, and in a way to contact people, whether they're newsmakers or sources or people who are involved in stories. It's a way to not only know what's going on, but as a way to get in touch with people and to reach out to people in a variety of different ways. And so being plugged into that whole area, I think, is a big part of what's going on in journalism and being able to do your job.
No, so in 2012, I don't know how many of you remember this huge scandal in baseball. Biogenesis was a lab out of Miami that was giving a lot of drugs to a lot of players. And when we first got a tip about what's going on, that was really the first time, with an investigation that size, was able to look at all the players in this thing, who ran the lab, who they were connected to, who was in their family, because people put everything on social media. And, we'd use it as a tool before that, but we were able to map out before we even started who everybody was and what their connections were. But one other thing, there's also kind of an insidious influence with it as well. I mean, it's a great practical tool, but on the other hand, the instant feedback you get, which is so warped and so intense, it can really influence how you do your job, especially if you're delving into a subject as sensitive as religion, and by that I mean college sports. The nastiest stuff I ever got was about college sports, as anyone here can tell you, because it really is religion. And you cannot help but have a reaction to it. You can try to be professional and put it aside and do your job, but the kind of pushback you get, the intensity of it, the threats you can get, it is very different if you're a woman in this business. Jill can take that if she likes, but it is a force that is in your face the way you never had to deal with before.
Yeah, like I totally agree with that. Years ago, when we were doing stories that ultimately led to the firing of the Ohio State football coach, like the comments were really bad. And this is one of the nicer things somebody said to me, is that I must have gone to Michigan.
So with that said, considering you guys are investigative journalists, if somebody hears about a story or puts something out knowing you guys have spent months working on it and it's still not finished, how do you guys handle that? Do you just let them run with what they have, or do you feel the need to kind of push the story out quicker?
It's a bigger deal for you than for me.
Yeah, but I think your thoughts on this are the ones we need to hear.
You can't. You can only do what you can do. I mean, knowing whether or not there's something else that's going on, you can't allow that to push yourself into writing or reporting something that you haven't got. And you have to, there are obvious sort of standards for it, but I think even those standards get put into sort of a gray area, and you make them on a case-by-case, almost sometimes hour-by-hour kind of decision about how you go about doing things based on what else is happening around you.
I think that the really tough thing when a story kind of gets out ahead of you is the narrative sets in. It just kind of gels. And now you're fighting, that as well. What if your reporting doesn't fit what everybody else is saying? Sometimes you need more time. Sometimes you have good information, but it is not complete. But Twitter has decided, no, this is what the story is. It can be really tough to do your job that way. I'm trying to think of, even go back to biogenesis, there was, it's a little different, but we weren't ready to go yet. And a newspaper, I don't need to pick a fight with anybody, but I used to work there, did a story saying that the DEA was investigating this case. I knew that wasn't true. But I also knew that Major League Baseball had told them that was true because they wanted to put pressure on the U.S. attorney to force the DEA to investigate it. So what do I do with that? It's just one example, but that stuff comes up. Am I going to respond to their reporting? In that case, we took our time, and then that story, while we were waiting to do it right, well, I don't need to go down this whole rabbit hole, but somebody in that lab in biogenesis was trying to give us documents. Somebody at our place made it difficult for them, and so they walked in the Miami New Times with a box full of records, and they got the story. That's a whole other seminar. But look, there's an old expression in the business, write it or read it. Unfortunately now, when you may read it sooner, and there's a good chance it's wrong.
No, that's understandable. Jill, Kathleen clearly is trying to put a pitch on students to come here to the Arnolt Center and take part in it. You have a big influence here in the Arnolt Center. Can you talk about some of the stories you've done and why it would be good for students to have an interest in joining the program.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the stories that we've tackled that we wouldn't have been able to pull off without the army of students that have worked with us. And probably one of the most ambitious ones, and Kathleen still hates me to this day for this one, is that I wanted to kind of look into the world of horse racing. New regulations were coming down the pike for thoroughbred racing, but there's all kinds of other racing, and racing is regulated by each state where it's allowed. There's like 35-ish states that have live racing. So we collected records from all of these state racing commissions to look at trainers who had been disciplined for doping allegations. And then also looking at horses who died during training or during races. And without the students helping us, I mean, these records were not in any sort of standard format. There were things that were handwritten. I mean, there's just like even among the regulators, there's like very little regulation, if you will. And things were written on pieces of paper, like trainer so-and-so, was caught doping. So it really wasn't all hands on deck to get this. And it was like, it turned out to be a really powerful story because as far as I know, that we were the only place that has ever really kind of looked at horse racing through this lens of all of these trainers in the past 5 years and how many had been disciplined in various different states. And it's just really a slap on the wrist. And this came about because of the whole thing with Medina Spirit, the Kentucky Derby winner from a couple years ago.
By a raise of hands, who paid attention to Brittany Griner when she was locked up in Russia? Note the hand in the middle right there. TJ spent a lot of time following this case. TJ, did you make it over to Russia, part of the coverage? And if not, how tough was it to cover it across the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, whichever way you want to go?
Mike, you asked that question as though you may know the answer. It was tough. I had reported in Russia 5 years ago. In fact, I think right about now 5 years ago, for a story we did about Vladimir Putin's involvement in international sport and how he used sports and major events for his geopolitical goals. It was a pretty intense, major project we're very proud of, but that kind of made me the Russia guy. And by the way, it's pretty funny because when you've just done one story there and then they introduce you on shows to talk, suddenly it's like you are, endowed chair in Russia studies from Stanford University. I was a reporter who did a story there, but that was something. So I ended up being the one to do it, and I had some connections over there from people we dealt with, and so I was able to reach out to them very early for some help on it, reaching out, trying to get stuff from official sources. The problem was, getting there. A war had just started. And there was a brief discussion. Somebody told me, we think we can get you in the courtroom during her trial. And I wasn't really eager to go back because, when we went the first time, we got debriefed by a former U.S. intelligence official who said, when you go there, you will be surveilled. Don't try to detect it. Don't try to avoid it, because if you do that, then they'll treat you like a spy. So you're a little paranoid the whole time, but this seemed pretty exciting. I called somebody at the State Department and said, what do you think? And she said, I don't know. There's a do not travel, but I know NPR has somebody there. CNN has somebody. They called their European colleagues. She called back and said, yeah, it was described to me as a spectacularly bad idea. ESPN's too high profile. They said they had no assurances they could keep me safe because they were locking people up. And as much as I like a good story, I'm not that stupid. But no, it did create a huge problem, which is everything that all the information I'm getting is coming through American sources, through the State Department, through the White House, through people around Brittany Griner. And no matter how well-intentioned or what good faith I think they may be speaking in, I'm still only hearing it from them. And I had to remind myself, if there was a mantra that carried me through it, it was, I don't know what I don't know. And then my best Russia contact ended up leaving because she's trying to get asylum here. So you always had to kind of take things with a grain of salt and know that there is no way to completely report this story because I can't walk into a courtroom over there.
If you do have any questions, please raise your hand. We have microphones off to the side. If you have any questions at any point through this, you made a mention about how you were only able to get the American side. And as journalists, we're taught to try to get both sides of the story. How did you handle it from getting it from the Russian side of things?
Google Translate, fantastic tool. I did learn to read Cyrillic, and so I could search for, before, not just for this story. I'm not, nearly that smart. It took a long time, but I would search for her name for the name of Victor Boot, who was the guy in the American prison in Indiana, I think, who was traded for her, and would search their names. And I knew enough about Russia and spoke to enough experts. Again, I don't care who you are in this business, how long you've done it, you are not an expert. You just have access to them. And one thing you know about Russian media is it's all state-run. So if you were reading something in TASS, the official news agency, that meant it was coming from the government. So I was able to report first that they had proposed this trade of Victor Boot for Brittany Griner. So you could get a sense, what they were reporting, what the Russian government wanted out. It was propaganda, but at least it was a reflection of what was going on. And then I'd talk to all my experts here in the UK and, actually one in Russia, who were able to help interpret that and kind of flesh it out.
Steve, you spend a lot of time on the college side of things. I'm always interested on the college buyout of these coaches. They're set for life when they get fired. It's like getting fired may turn out to be a good thing if you have no interest in ever coaching again because you're getting a lot of money to essentially go away and not be around the program. When it comes to public record searching and getting the information on how these numbers go, what is the protocol in trying to figure that stuff out?
It's just making use of open records requests and then doing a lot of grinding. Going to what Jill was talking about in terms of things that would, a reason to be interested in investigative journalism, to be interested in the program here. One of the great things about being in school at a public institution is that the school is subject to open records requests. So you guys are in a position to be able to find out a lot of stuff about the Indiana University Athletics Department and about the university as a whole. So, and how these things impact your life. Here at Indiana, as far as I'm aware, there's not a student fee that you pay for athletics. At a lot of other schools, both public and private, students are required to pay a fee for athletics. The quid pro quo is that you get, free or discounted admission to ball games, but like if you don't care about athletics or you don't want to go to the games, or in the case of Duke, where you can't get tickets to the games or because you don't want to sit out and camp out all night for tickets, you pay anyway. And that money is used to help fund the athletics program as a whole. And given that money is fungible, that that money helps create an environment and the possibility of having coaches who sign long-term contracts that are heavily guaranteed, because coaches have a lot of leverage in negotiations with schools. So when if things don't go well, and the school wants to fire the coach without having a good reason other than winning and losing, not winning enough games, those coaches end up getting paid for not coaching, essentially. And that money that is coming out of your pocket, either through student fees or through institutional support of the program, you pay the institution. Your money is going to work in those ways. And again, while that's not as much the case at Indiana and a lot of other Big Ten schools, it is the case at a lot of other places. And when I've spoken to other student groups at their individual schools, a lot of students don't know how much money they're paying every year for help finance an athletics program. In the state of Virginia, where I live, because of the way the state legislature has required athletics department funding to work, the student fee assessments are in the thousands of dollars every year. So part of your bill every year, if you go to a school like Radford, which is it's a Division I school that doesn't have a football team, but students at Radford are paying over $1,000 a year toward supporting the athletics program.
I'll start with this question with you first. Actually, Jack, did you have a question first?
Yeah, I was kind of interested, whether it's a long-term story, Brittany Griner one, or horse racing one, how do you manage your time day to day when you've got no real end goal with the story?
Just work all day long. And then your kid and your wife and all your friends get all pissed at you, and you're like, it's something where, you have to sort of figure out in your own mind how you're going to go at it. When you're younger, you can work all the time because, you've got not a lot else going on, and you can really throw yourself into stuff. Even now, doing what I'm doing at this stage of my life where I'm doing it, it's still, pretty hard at times to be able to, pull away from it without, and to do, just like actually having a life. So it requires some discipline, some organization, and, sort of an understanding of when it is you really have to, work all the time and when you can back away a little bit.
I'm going to share this just because maybe it'll help you feel a little better about yourself if it's needed, but I'm horrible at it. I mean, to this day, I'm so bad at it. I always feel like I have to have the pressure of a deadline. Otherwise, I will flounder. I will, my mind will go everywhere. It's so easy to get into rabbit holes on these things. That's a really tough thing. When you do a longer investigation, there are a million rabbit holes you can go down. And we're all kind of nerds that way. And, my best strategy is just to answer the phone when one of my editors calls and says, what's going on with such and such, and then I have to come up with an answer. I wish I had a better answer than that, but I'm horrible at it.
Yeah, I think for us, especially with working with the students at the Arnolt Center, is that we set a lot of sort of weekly deadlines, and they might be, small things, not like, write this big story or have this big thing done, but just just a weekly, just set mini deadlines for yourself to get, by the end of the week, I'm going to have this, that, and the other thing done. Sometimes it's like, okay, we need to get these public records requests out. So by the end of next week, we want to have, 20 of the 40 public records requests made, or whatever the case may be. Small deadlines.
That's what I do.
Don't forget, if you have any questions, feel free to please raise your hand, and I will definitely call on you. So yes, Jill, I wanted to ask, in the age of everybody trying to be first, quick, and wanting to make that leap right away out of college, I've had this discussion quite a bit with the students. What are some of the key components on being a good investigative journalist?
Oh, boy. It's curiosity. I think if you're curious and...
I call it nosy, but I'll go with nosy.
Nosy, right? And a little forceful. I think those are pretty much the two qualities that you need. And you be a little forceful to hey, give me that record, or Mayor, you need to answer this question. You're a public official, and just curious. I mean, I think for a lot of us, stories bubble up because it's like, what's up with horse racing? You know, what's up with, you know, college recruiting? What's up with, you know, how much coaches are being paid? I mean, I think it's just a lot of that natural curiosity.
That's a huge thing. I had a family friend who was used to be the foreign desk editor at the New York Times, said that the best copy he ever got out of his correspondence was when they were new to a country, because they looked at it with fresh eyes. If you're young and you're going in this business, you've got fresh eyes. Trust that. But on the other hand, if you want to succeed in this business, there is so much pressure to create a brand for yourself. I hate that word. It's great if you're selling soap. But for what we do, it takes patience. You know, the emphasis has to be on learning your craft, so that when people read what's under your name comes to mean something. They know this is somebody who has done the work. You know, if I read something by these two, if I read something by Paula, you know, all my years reading Mike, you know who they are, but it takes a long time to develop that. Learn the craft and make sure you're right, because there's so much pressure for, say something outrageous, get out there first with it. And it's a great way to get attention, but it is not a good path to do what we do.
I would say to like persist. I mean, for a lot of what I do, which is geared heavily around open record stuff, it's just continuing to pursue it and pursue it and pursue it and not let it go. And when you get something that it poses another, you know, it raises another question, ask the next question, and to try to do the best you can to be not accepting of something in front of you, to be like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't quite work right, that doesn't read right to me, and to ask about it.
Luke?
Luke Drum, senior at IU. So in my class, we talk a lot about networking and like how important it is to not earn that grade. And investigative journalism, how important is networking, and like how often do you reach back in and like connect with people, even though you don't know if you're ever gonna meet them again, but you might just want to have a conversation with them in case you do. How does that work?
That's fine. I'll jump in on that, because I had one of those calls this morning with somebody who's pitching me a story I'm not even slightly interested in, but he used to be incredibly well connected in several organizations, and I still need to go to him for connections to those people. So part of it, I think I'm a genuinely nice guy. It's nice to say hi to him. I had no interest in what he was pitching. I didn't really pretend that I didn't, but no, you have to do that. I mean, in part because you may need to go back to them. But even the people that where it's confrontational or, antagonistic, you don't have to be a jerk. There are times where there are people where I've kind of gotten into it, but if you do it respectfully, if you do it, you don't apologize for doing your job. You never do that. But you deal with people honestly, politely, and I've gone back to people who were pretty mad at me the last time we talked, and they remember that. They remember that, all right, at least he was respectful. I mean, so whether it's somebody who was a great source or somebody you had to bang heads with, I think if you treat them as professionals, you absolutely need to keep those relationships. Because how many of you are baseball fans? I mean, if you know Scott Boras, the agent of death, as they call him, I had a 1 week period, him screaming at me, threatening to sue me over a story. A week later, hey, TJ, it's Scott. What's important is we always keep the line of communications open.
Either you two?
Yeah, I'd say, I think this is just a great example that when I left the Dispatch, I got a handwritten letter of thanks to my service to the citizens of this great state of Ohio from Mike DeWine, who at the time was the Attorney General of the state and who's now the governor. Thought that was strange, but it says something.
You ever had any issues, Steve?
People love me, man. No, what TJ said is what it's about. I mean, you try, you want to be respectful, but you got to do what you got to do. And yeah, I mean, from time to time, you have to blow up somebody, but you better pick your spots, because you have to think through the consequence of what that's going to do. And sometimes, you have to think in terms of the bigger picture rather than, this one thing. Sometimes it's worth taking a beat on a small thing for a longer haul goal.
TJ, you and I both dealt with our fair share of agents in the professional world. And we know agents only tell one side of the story, looking for the clients. How do you handle things if an agent says you, quote unquote, burn the bridge with him to try to repair that bridge?
Oh, man. Sometimes you don't, they're so transactional. I mean, that's one thing about agents is even the good ones, you can typically rely on them to be kind of reptilian. But I had one, actually this turned out to be before biogenesis, but connected to it. I swear I did other stories, but just a lot of good stories out of that. We got a tip that Ryan Braun of the Brewers had tested positive for testosterone. And I had it down cold. And his agent starts calling people at my network and saying, TJ's story is wrong. And some people on my network repeated that, not using those words, but just saying a source close to familiar with the test results says it may be such and such, which was just spin from an agent. I called him and I said, what are you saying is wrong? Well, it's just wrong. I said, I have damn good sources on this. I said, what are you saying is wrong? I said, if you're going to tell me it's wrong, tell me what I got wrong, and I'll get it right. Well, you said he failed the CIR test, which stands for carbon isotope ratio. It's kind of the foolproof test if testosterone came from your body or another source. I said, I have a really good source on that. You're saying he didn't fail it? No, you're wrong. And then this flashed in my head, wait a minute. There's another name for the same test, IRMS, isotope ratio mass spectrometry. I said, did he fail an IRMS test? He said, I don't have to answer that. And I said, okay, I got it. I get the game we're playing. I said, your client failed the test. The story's right. And this was a guy who was, like I said, calling colleagues of mine who were going on air, people who were not traditional journalists, didn't kind of come up the way we did. So this was a case where the guy essentially lied to me, tried to spin to me, and I had to remember at the end of the day, don't take it personally. Remember it, I'll never forget it, but don't take it personally. This guy is trying to do his job. Again, he may be a reptile, but that's what he's doing. Don't take it personally, and you just keep going back.
Kevin?
Kevin Burr, so when you're you have an investigative piece, and you're telling the story of somebody, how do you get their voice in the story, and how do you make sure you just kind of tell their experience as well?
Ask them. I mean, that sounds like that response sounds like a really simple, assholic response, but that's the way it works. I mean, you need to, if you're investigating somebody, at some point you have to go at them and ask the question. It may not be the first thing that you do. It might actually deliberately be the last thing that you do, but that's what you do. I mean, you go at them, or if they're not going to talk, whether they're the lawyer or somebody who represents their point of view, and try to go out and get it.
How many times do you try to go at them if they say they're not going to talk to you? At what point do you throw in the white towel and say, okay, they're not talking?
I think it's a case-to-case basis, and in some instances, you give them a deadline, and you have to, you can't say, hey, you have 5 minutes to make up your mind. You have to have it be a reasonable amount of time for people to put together a response, because if you're dealing with an individual as opposed to an institution, even an individual may want to consult with with a lawyer, with an advisor, with a friend, with family member, whatever. But yeah, I mean, sometimes that's what we do, is you say, okay, here are questions, you have 24 hours. And, if we don't hear from you in 24 hours, we're publishing the story. And we'll say that you declined to comment and we made an effort to reach you, and this is how we made the effort and this is what we did, but we're going to cover that base as well. We're not just going to ignore it. And even then, you have to perform within, reason. I mean, if you give somebody 24 hours and they get back to you at 23 hours and 45 minutes and say, hey, we'll have something for you in a couple hours, another couple hours isn't going to make a difference. I mean, as long as you're feeling like, that it's not being done in a fashion to undermine your story or, result in you losing the story, then okay, give them 2 more hours and let, get the answer. Because sometimes a bad answer is, for your purposes, just as well. I mean, and sometimes no answer is better than a shitty answer. The fact that somebody decided not to speak about something sometimes speaks for itself. So, there are a lot of different ways to go at it and strategies that you use. And I think you have to, I go back, and I know I'm repeating myself when I say this, but you have to sort of make these kinds of decisions case to case and, situation to situation.
There are times where it's something where you're calling an organization, especially if they're heavily lawyered up, and they're prepared for this, that the subject has been out there. They don't need 3 days to respond. So you're going to, you're going to have a very different response than someone who is not a public figure, doesn't deal with the media, is hearing it for the first time. And that really just comes from experience. But it's, like Steve was saying, you can't just dump it on them. You got 5 minutes and you're on the air. But other times, when you're dealing with a more sophisticated, operation, like with Ryan Braun, for example, when we're ready to go with that, he hired Marty Singer, who's a famous celebrity attorney in LA, who has said, my job is to scare the shit out of reporters so they don't report stuff. I think that's on his business card. And he is calling me, screaming at me, I can't wait to own Disney. But he was buying time is what he was doing. It wasn't, sometimes they'll do that because they want to put something out ahead of time and get ahead of you. So a lot of that just comes from experience, having people around you who are experienced enough to know, when you give them a lot of leash and when you say, no, you're on the clock.
I don't have anything.
All right.
Covered that well.
Talia?
Hi, Talia Goodness. Have you ever been in a situation where someone's beaten you to a story that you've been working on for a really long time? And how did you go about kind of handling that? Did you scratch the whole thing? Did you go back and try to find a new angle to it? How did you go about it?
I cut out the story and I taped it to my refrigerator and left it there.
I cried.
Crying helps.
Drank.
You go back. No, you go back. There are times you get, you've been working on something and somebody else gets it before you. There are times where you got it, okay, you're pissed, but you get back in the fight because you can get your own story out that might advance the story. If you have particularly if you have a big investment in something time-wise and you don't want to drop it, you got to try to figure out another way, or dig back in and get back in on the story. There have been lots of instances where stories have been broken by one news organization, but the story, continues to go on, and other news organizations end up breaking news on the same story as it continues to develop.
I think what helps sometimes in those situations is think of it in the long term. You may get beat right then, but think about, you're also writing for the record. You're writing, as a record someone's going to look back on someday on what the history of this story is. Maybe you won't get it in the moment, but try to be right. Try to be the one who has the definitive version. Again, with biogenesis, that happened, where, like I said, the guy tried to send me documents He was an employee of this clinic. He reached out to someone named Blaine at ESPN Viewer Services, wherever you are, Blaine. And he sent them an email saying, I'm trying to reach TJ Quinn. It's for a story. This is about a drug investigation. Where can I get in touch? And Blaine wrote back, I'm sorry, we don't give out information like that about our talent. Please feel free to write him at 1 ESPN Plaza, Bristol, Connecticut. So Porter Fisher took the box of documents and walked into the Miami New Times and said, here. And I found that out because when we did finally reach him, he said, I tried to get a hold of you. All we could do at that point was, he literally walked in their offices with the box, here are all the documents. I'd been working on this for 13 months. That's the sickest I ever felt in my life. I had to land in Miami because someone had just told me the night before, I have what you want, come down, I'll give it to you. I get on the plane, the door shuts, my colleague Mike Fish calls and reads me the New Times story. I land, I have to go to a studio now to be on Outside the Lines to talk about the Miami New Times story. And Bob Lee was the host, and I forget who the other guests were. He's like, in their ear, hey, Steve, Bob Lee, how are you? Good. All right, we're going to get you about 2 minutes. Jill, how you doing? Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, someone's going to be in your ear. We're going to go in about 60 seconds. And then it's my turn. Hey, how you doing? But the next day, we're able to come back with a story that someone was with Tony Bosch when he went to A-Rod's house, injected him, and got him to bleed all over his white carpet. Describe where it was, what the drugs were. You come back and just try to move it forward. But Blaine, wherever you are.
How challenging is that when you get scooped on a story, and you've spent 6 months, a year working on it to be able to advance it so you're not repeating what the competition just put out 24 hours earlier?
In our case, this was not a sports story, but this was back in the mid-2000s. We were working on stories related to dangerous baby products, cribs, strollers, etc., and how the Consumer Product Safety Commission, which is supposed to regulate these products, was really failing. And we had been months into collecting records through a Freedom of Information Act request, and those can take forever to get, in fact, years. And while we had lots and lots of records come in, but lo and behold, the Chicago Tribune already had those records and produced a Pulitzer Prize winning piece, and rock on, it was great, it was awesome. And now here it is, fast forward all these many years later, and I'm working on these stories again, because guess what? While the Chicago Tribune did their series, made a lot of progress and moved the needle, it's nowhere near where it needs to be to fully protect consumers, especially babies, and lots of babies die in products, unfortunately. So it's kind of like, it was, to me, dead years ago, and then lo and behold, it just kind of came back up again, so you never know.
Mitchell?
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. I was wondering how you guys deal with sources that want to remain anonymous, because I know that a lot of times that can kind of take away from the credibility of stories, especially in sports.
Can everybody hear that back there? He was.
Hey, Mitchell, can somebody, hey, Zach, can you grab that microphone, please? Bet you didn't think you had to do some work when you came today, huh, Zach? Thank you.
It's not a.
So my question was, how do you guys deal with sources who want to remain anonymous? Because a lot of times that can take away from kind of the credibility of the story.
We all struggle with that. It's kind of funny. There's a paradox that sometimes it's sexier if the person remains anonymous. You know, the Watergate scandal became less interesting when you knew it was Mark Felt was Deep Throat, and that it was a senior FBI official who had an agenda. It's different than some mysterious figure in a garage. You try to get them to go on the record because you're trying to have something that's accurate and credible. If you are going to use them, and we all have to do it sometimes, you have to be very careful that, you know, what is this person's motive? Are they just trying to get away with taking shots at somebody? Are they credible? Are they in a position to know? Because you can have somebody who gives you a great quote, but they don't actually have authority on the topic. You know, some places are different. I've never had an anonymous source where my editors didn't know who it was. At least one person knew who it was. So, you know, there's a fail-safe that it's not TJ trying to get away with something, because we've all, if you're in this business, you know somebody who's done that. You know, so you do as much as you can to identify it, but if you're going to be anonymous, you better protect them as well. Because I've seen people do it very sloppily where, oh, that can only be Mitchell who said that.
I think you make decisions, again, it's a case-by-case circumstance. I mean, I've worked both as an editor and working as a reporter, and have gone back and forth in both roles. And, you know, you have to think about, you know, again, like what TJ was saying about, you know, motives and, you know, does the comment from the person really advance the story? Is the quality of the story potentially worth throwing into question in order to have that comment? There are a whole range of things that I think you take into consideration in how you decide whether and when to use sources anonymously, and how you describe them, and trying to describe why the person needs to be kept anonymous.
And then there's also like kind of the flip side of it, like in the broadcast realm. I mean, if somebody decides to go on TV, and despite, like, you know, masking their voice or masking, you know, their image or whatever, there is no guarantee that, you know, you might look at that and say, oh, I know that that's Jill up there. You're like, there's no doubt. I mean, you can't promise that no one will ever find out, at least from a TV kind of perspective, because there could be, you know, like, I know that's my daughter who's saying that, you know. But it's in newspapers or in print, it's definitely a lot easier, because you can, you know, our anonymous source told us this, and you don't know what that anonymous source looks like or sounds like or anything. So just sort of another aspect of it.
Yes, ma'am.
I teach young journalists at Indiana State up the road, and I was wondering if you could talk about, outside of the job, are there technologies or industry trends that are making your job harder or easier? What's it like to be an investigative reporter professionally right now?
Again, because of most of what I do is geared around the acquisition of public records, I'll speak to it in that area. When I'm dealing primarily with colleges and universities, schools have become increasingly segmented in how you can make an open records request. It used to be that you could basically make an open records request in crayon on the back of a dinner napkin, and that would be considered a viable open records request. A lot of institutions now require you to fill out an online form in a particular way. And schools, particularly larger schools who are better staffed, have gotten, you know, increasingly careful about what they will give you, in what time frame they'll give it to you, and or whether they'll give it to you at all and basically say, you know, screw you, come and get us. And sometimes that's what you have to do. You know, we went through something recently where we ended up suing the University of Nebraska over something, and we got it, and we got paid by the University of Nebraska. So they, spent a lot of money. It was the world's most expensive open records request from the standpoint of the University of Nebraska. So, I mean, sometimes you have to, sometimes you have to be prepared to tee it up and bring it. And that's how you get people's attention sometimes, too. I mean, so that to me, that just that, like I said, public entities are getting more and more, more and more careful because they're facing, in their defense, I mean, they're facing more and more records requests.
I think one little trap with technology sometimes is trusting it too much, and just being aware of the limitations of whatever you're using. I just went through this recently with a young colleague who was showing her, a couple different, search apps, Nexus and TLO, which are great. But I looked up a couple people, friends of mine, who I knew had some things on their record that should show up, and it missed them. So it's very easy to think that you're using one of these very expensive subscription services and getting everything, and you are not. So it's just something, generally to keep in mind, that even with the great technology we have, there are limitations. You're still going to have to call places. You're still going to have to try to get original source documents instead of relying on somebody else.
The not inserting your opinion part is easy. Just don't insert your opinion.
That's actually not easy for college students. I've graded enough papers where they've inserted their opinions a little too much. So,
well, so trying to pull your own point of view out of it. The biggest thing in that area to me is being able to contextualize something because of there are different. Setting aside the most common source of athletics department finances, for example, which is this NCAA mandated report that schools have to fill out every year, you're dealing with different accounting systems, different ways of counting different types of expenses or revenues and how they're classified. The other thing is that you should never, in a numbers-driven story, you should never strictly look at 1 year. Even if you're really interested in 1 year, you have to contextualize that 1 year based on stuff that happened in another year, because you're never quite sure why something spiked up, or whether there was a spike. It's like they spent, the athletics department spent $20 million more this year than they did last year. Well, it turns out they fired the football coach and all the staff that other year, in the year that you're looking at. And so if you didn't know that, that number looks like that number's way out of whack. But if you don't know some broader context to it, you got to have sort of something to compare it to. And the other piece of it is there's really no substitute for asking people about it. It's like if you are looking into the financial records, or you're looking into a particular aspect of a coach's contract or some other business arrangement that the school has, you need to ask about, ask somebody who knows or whose job it is to know, what does this mean? And in a lot of instances, you'd be surprised. There are times where public officials, whether they're at colleges or anywhere else in government, appreciate that you asked. And sometimes your story gets a lot better because you asked. And somebody will tell you stuff that, makes the story even more interesting. So just sort of looking at it looking at numbers and just hauling off and writing about it, yeah, I mean, sometimes it is what it is. But sometimes, in more instances than not, by grinding in and doing that and putting in that extra elbow grease, you get a better story.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, my name's Ryan Murphy. I'm a grad student. I would assume that you are doing some sports reporting because you enjoy sports, at least to some degree. So
Used to.
I was wondering if doing investigative sports reporting burns you out on enjoying sports just like as a hobby or pastime. And sounds like maybe it does. But I was going to say, if not, how do you prevent yourself from becoming overly cynical?
That's a great question. That's part of the reason why I'm sitting here right now.
I grew up in the shadow of the horseshoe. I live 5 minutes from the Ohio State University. My dad was a member of the marching band. Huge, been to a bazillion different games. And then when I started investigating Ohio State, it just really took the fun and the sheen out of it. It just was like, they're slimy, they're dirty, they cheat. And it just makes it not that much fun anymore when you kind of really start peeling back the onion. So that's my story.
I mean, I spent 7 years as a Major League Baseball beat writer because I loved baseball. And I came away from it feeling like I love the game more than ever. I despise the business of it more than ever. And it's tough because you end up rooting more for people than for teams. I grew up a Mets fan, My sons are huge Mets fans. I cannot get the excitement that they get, but I can get involved in individual stories. And when you learn, the inner workings of something, when you get to that kind of esoteric level of appreciating something, that, I don't mean to be corny about it, but the flip side is you start to see a beauty in it that you hadn't seen before and could not appreciate if you didn't go there every day. That is amazing. The business of it, especially, I have only done college stuff peripherally the way these guys have, and I mean that's a whole other cesspool. At least in the professionals, they don't care to be anything but pretend to be anything but what they are. But I've also covered a number of Olympics, and when you cover doping as long as I have, which is more than 20 years now, I've done that topic. You can't look at anything with a sense of wonder anymore. Unless you're wondering what drug they're on. You can't. And that's kind of depressing. Bob Beamon setting the long jump record in 1968 was one of the most incredible human feats ever recorded. If it happened now, there's no way you would believe it. I mean, that's what we've lost. That's kind of depressing. But that's also just anybody I know in any business will tell you same thing when you just get to know too much about how the sausage is made.
If you like sports, play. I mean, I still play. That's how I did this. So I mean, if you like, that's how you maintain, your interest or your love of sports is just, stay in it in ways that are, that are good and true to what you got in, why you got into it in the first place.
My corollary to that, though, is if you love sports, don't coach youth sports.
As my wife and kids laugh at me right now.
As I did for 19 years, yeah.
But investigate youth sports.
Yes, sir.
I'm a freshman, and I'm just wondering how you guys got your foot in the door to just the world of investigative journalism coming out of college, and if you guys have any tips for a student who's in college and wants to prepare for the job world.
I mean, you have to. I could tell you the origin story of how I got involved in journalism, which would make your head explode. But getting into investigative journalism for me was totally serendipitous. I mean, I didn't go into it with an eye toward, yeah, that's what I want to do. It just sort of happened that way. But the basis for it was having done like all the beat work, along the way. It's not that it can't be done and that it hasn't been done, but it's to be able to have the skill set to do investigative reporting, I think requires really firm grounding in the basics of reporting. And you like in sports, the way you get the basics in reporting is like walking up and down the sideline of a high school football game, trying to cover the ball game, and figuring out how to do that, as opposed to if you've never done that before and you're accustomed to going to an IU football game and sitting in a press box and having somebody hand you a sandwich and a stat package. It's a whole different world if you have to stand outside in a rainstorm, keeping your own stats and trying to figure out what happened in the game, and then have to go write a 12-inch story about it on deadline in the back of your car. That's how you sort of start out with it, and you go from there, or you do the beat work like TJ did, where you understand and figure out how to report and how to build relationships. I mean, he can speak to that, in doing what he did in baseball coverage, having to learn how to do that.
No, the first thing I would tell you is drop in the expectations of what your career should be. I knew two things when I graduated from the University of Missouri. One is I wasn't going to work in sports, and I wasn't going to work in TV. So, that's also before I knew the difference between what they pay you in TV versus newspapers, and that newspapers would disappear. But you just have to be open to anything. And if you're going to, but in the meantime, just learn your craft, learn to report, learn data. Don't get sucked into the technology. Don't get sucked into the platforms. Way too many schools are emphasizing the technology, and sometimes it's because the companies that make the technology give those schools grants, so you get to play with their toys. The technology will be obsolete by the time you get out. I really kind of fell into investigative like I fell into sports. My first job was I was a municipal reporter in the south suburbs of Chicago, doing cops checks and planning and zoning and tax increment finance districts and sewer district meetings and, really boring shit, but it was really important. And you also learn how society works. And I left Chicago, went to Salt Lake City, was working for a year, they were grooming me to be a political writer, and the White Sox beat opened up at my old place. And it speaks well to being nice to your old boss. All of a sudden I was a Major League Baseball beat writer. And I became, Mike kind of alluded to this at the beginning, I switched to investigative because I came home from a road trip one time and my daughter kind of didn't recognize me. And she was 16 years old. No, she was a baby, but I was like, screw this. There was an opening when I was at the Daily News. We had a sports investigative team. There was an opening. I had to audition. I did a piece about the use of human growth hormone in major league clubhouses. So 7 years of beat experience all of a sudden meets this new story. I was able to do it. The one thing I'll tell you with investigative journalism is it's more mindset than anything else. It really is. You can learn the tools, and it's not hard to do. It really isn't. It's your mindset going in. Think about what more is there to this that you're always looking at that next level.
Let me before I get to you, I'm going to piggyback off of this. A question that I get from a lot of students is about, whether they're from Chicago or Indianapolis or New York, the goal of wanting to work in their hometown. And as I relay to them, when you get in this industry, you may end up in a Salt Lake City or a small town or move across the country from your family. How important is that to have an open mind, to be able to be willing to relocate anywhere to achieve the goals you want to?
I got nothing on this. I've lived and worked in Columbus my entire life.
And that's why I was hoping to skip you on this one, Jill.
Well, they looked at me.
I know.
Well, I can tell you from where I went to college. One of my first mentors in college in journalism was Ken Rosenthal, who's the Fox baseball reporter. Kenny's first job, if I remember correctly, was at the York Daily Record in Pennsylvania. And Kenny grew up in the New York area and went to college in Philadelphia. And, there were a group of us who were at the school newspaper there that, and so you were in the mindset, it's like, I just want a job. And it didn't matter where. Just get someplace where you can get your foot in the door. If you can't get a full-time job like me, which, my father was absolutely thrilled at having spent 4 years of tuition at an Ivy League institution for me to move back home and be working as an hourly wage earner at the Baltimore Orioles baseball ticket store in downtown DC, which was what my first job was out of college. And I sent out 1 million letters, whatever. And at the Post, my first job was taking high school football scores on Friday nights, one night a week for 3 hours, and you got paid. That was that. And so you just anywhere you can get your foot in the door, and you got to go wherever and do whatever. Just get in the door somewhere. You can make of it what you make of it what you'll be able to make of it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Investigative journalism, it seems to me, is a really important topic, and I'm glad we're having this conference. And I want to go back to the issue that came up earlier when I think Steve said, get your view out of it. And I'm wondering if that's really what we need to be thinking about as investigative journalists. As I've been hearing lots of stories today about points of view, about what's gone wrong, what's unfair, what's unjust. So the question to me seems to be not keeping your point of view out of it, but how do you express your point of view? Do you do it through just opinion, or do you do it through a careful attention to the facts and get your opinion, your perspective into a story through the facts, not just through some statement of opinion?
I mean, to me, again, I come at this from in a fairly narrow sort of way in writing a lot about the business of college sports. And to me, it's just, you let the facts speak for themselves and you let people sort it out from there. I try my best to be as agnostic about it as possible. Past that, Nick Saban getting paid $11 million a year says what it says.
Look, we're all human, and journalists are just as subject to confirmation bias as anybody else. And sometimes we can convince ourselves we're above it because you can write in plain declarative language that sounds detached from what you're doing. But obviously, every sentence you write, everything you say on air, is a choice. To me, it's about approach. My mantra has always been we have to treat journalism as science. You start with an hypothesis, but you do everything you can to disprove it. If you go into it thinking, I think this is what the story is, well, by God, every piece of information you get is going to confirm that. That's the human side of it. It's about recognizing your biases. It's about trying to account for them and to challenge every assumption you have going into a story, whether it's feels like an established narrative or not. And there's a discipline to that. And sometimes one of the tougher things in this business is it leads you to stories that are a lot less sexy than you thought they were when you started. Because sometimes what you thought was going on, there's sometimes a threshold mistake in this business. When you look at an institution or organization, you think, those bastards are up to something. Well, if you go into that attitude, you're going to find something. If you go in thinking, I want to know what's going on there, without that assumption, without openness, you got a better shot of telling us a clean story that's free of your own bias.
The other part of it too is to always keep in mind both sides of it. I mean, like I just cited the example of Nick Saban making $11 million. The lawyer who represented us in our lawsuit against the University of Nebraska, said to me, man, it's unconscionable. I can't believe how much these guys are making. I said to him, well, look, compared to like, is this any better or any worse than a movie star who's making $20 million to make a movie? I mean, is that any better or any worse in a larger public policy, righteous life of anything? And so you can always look at it in both ways. I mean, there's some people who would say that at $11 million, it's outrageous that Nick Saban is making that kind of money. There are other people who would say and can easily make the case that he's underpaid at that rate. So, I mean, you try to look at things from both sides and maintain an open mind about it. And, again, it's like this line from The Big Bang Theory that is just like, it's a running joke in my house. But like, and my wife, because my wife works as a journalist as well. And it's like, I go outside and I talk to people. And, that's what you have to do.
All right, we got about 10 minutes left, so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Henry?
This young man.
You go. All right, let's go Henry first, and then we'll go to the young man in the blue.
It's your son, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, what you were saying about objectivity and recognizing your biases while trying to be objective. Obviously it applies to news, but also opinion pieces. And I was reading in USA Today this week, you can comment on this if you want, an article criticizing the New York Times' reporting on transgender issues. And the author, I read it just a couple days ago, the author of the piece said they didn't want to link the New York Times pieces because they didn't want to give them they didn't want to give those articles a platform, and they never specifically addressed what the New York Times had said that they found objectionable. So in reading this piece, I just thought this is just sort of leaking out going against the basic principles of journalism. So do you have any comments on that?
You mean like how can you talk about a subject if you're not willing to repeat what the subject is? Yeah. Essentially?
Yeah, I don't really, it's kind of hard for me to answer because I didn't see that, but there are, you don't want to sort of repeat the mistake so that the mistake takes hold. I don't know if that's the case, and, it's also a lot of times news media no longer, after sort of the initial news of a mass shooting, is not repeating the name of the mass shooter so as not to give, that person some sort of celebrity status or whatnot. So I think that's maybe part of the reason, but because I didn't really see it, that's kind of my guess.
There is a big push these days about not platforming people like crime perpetrators. We're dealing with this right now with a story that we're doing that's going to come out sometime next month. It's maybe 4 years ago, a young woman, track athlete, University of Utah, was killed by an ex-boyfriend. It got a lot of national attention. We've got a 4-year story coming. We're going to launch next month. It's an hour-and-a-half documentary, 12,000-word written piece. And there was a lot of discussion. How much attention do you turn to the man who killed her? The language of advocacy is it's her story. She was the victim of this. But our job is to make sure the audience understands the subject. So you ask yourself that question all the time. Are we reporting on him and his background in a way that illuminates this subject, or is it a way that's trying to humanize him in a way that is really unfair and takes away from what she went? There are no easy answers on that. But I disagree that sometimes you just dismiss part of a story because you don't like the person that it's about. You have to be able to talk about sensitive topics. On the other hand, when you do it, you better make sure you're including voices that are knowledgeable and that you're not just opining on something that's outside of your world in the name of objectivity. You've got to reach out for those knowledgeable voices.
Mr. Wells?
So
You should answer that question.
I'm out the business.
I don't know. I mean, I don't worry about. I know this is like it sounds like a really simplistic answer. I don't know. I don't pay attention so much to it.
I say thick skin. As I tell my students, you have to have thick skin to survive in this industry, because people are not going to like what you write, what you say on TV. They're going to come after you, especially on Twitter. Thick skin is 100% necessary. If not, as this row over here is looking at me and shaking their head, they know I've said it a million times. It's going to be tough to be able to survive if you don't have thick skin.
I'll tell you this, what helps is knowing why you're doing what you're doing. There are times, I'm not immune to what other people think of me. I don't like when somebody calls me names. But if I remember why I'm doing what I'm doing, that makes it a lot easier.
It also helps if you're, getting into investigative stuff. It helps, this is why it's so important to be correct. Why you go to the lengths that you go to be accurate and fair. People can argue with you about, whether it was appropriate or whether your way of doing things was right or whatever. But if you have, if you're accurate and you're fair, then, that goes a long way in being able to, defend yourself and to be able and equipped to sort of deal with somebody who wants to take a swing at what you're doing.
Any other final questions? Remember, take advantage of this opportunity. 3 of the best up here. All right, Kathleen's starting to make her way this way. So, Steve, TJ, thank you very much for the great information. Sorry about that. All right.
So everyone, we're going to take I want to thank you guys all. That was just terrific. And we're going to sign you up for our comedy team at some point. So we're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we're going to have a news panel, which I think you'll also enjoy. It's led by our friend Sarah Seidner from CNN, who just raced in here this morning. So take a break and come back at 3:15. We'll start the next panel. Thanks, everybody.
You get so many more.